The conclusion is, if there's no God, then we're just space dust. That's it.
You say that like it's a bad thing.
Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Plink. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. You know, one very common religious apologetic tactic is to try to get atheists to contend with the hypothetical notion that we might be wrong and what if God really does exist. They'll often lob things like Pascal's wager at us. You know, shouldn't you just believe in God, just in case? Because if God is real and you don't believe, you'll go to hell forever. So better to just believe as a bit of a cosmic insurance policy. Never mind the fact that one can't convince themselves to believe in something that they don't actually believe in. And that line of reasoning only works if the Christian God exists, while any other God existing just kind of makes things worse. Not to mention the whole idea of trying to trick an all-knowing deity by not being a true believer but just hedging your bets is to try to fake your way into heaven, and that can't possibly work. But yeah, the faithful are always trying to get non-believers to contend with the idea that they, the believer, are right, and we, the non-believer, are wrong. But they're a bit more reluctant to consider the alternative, and contend with the idea that God might not exist. And whenever they do, they just insist that everything would be pointless and meaningless and horrible and immoral, and wailing and gnashing of teeth would abound. Just the absolute worst interpretation of what no God existing would mean for the world, and then refusing to recognize that no God existing would result in the exact world that we actually inhabit. But today, we're going to be hearing from a theist who is contending with that very notion of no God existing. Father Mike Schmitz from the Ascension Presents channel is going to be giving his Catholic apologist interpretation of a world without God and what it would mean to his theistic interpretation if God didn't exist. So let's hear out his interpretation of a secular universe and see how long it takes him to go off the rails into religious gibberish and pessimistic nonsense. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, maybe pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm. Logic leaves little leeway linking lofty legends. Learning liberates lives lost looping lifeless lore. Loyalty to lying, lazy, lordly lunkheads limits learning and leads to lackluster living. May keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
So, I recently was talking with one of our students. This is someone who's searching, right? This is someone who's asking big questions and has read a lot when it comes to faith, has read a lot when it comes to aspects of science. And of course, caveat is I would maintain, and I'll maintain until the day I die, there is no contradiction between good faith and good science. Why? Because science is the pursuit of natural truth and faith is the pursuit of supernatural truth. Truth cannot contradict truth, so there is no contradiction between good science and good faith.
I beg to differ, sir.
There is an absolute gulf of contradictions between science and faith. And the only way to square the two is by mental gymnastics that would make Simone Biles jealous. And it's massively disingenuous to say that they don't contradict each other because science is the search for natural truths and faith is the search for supernatural truths. And that is just a nice-sounding soundbite to brush over the inconvenient reality that faith, particularly that which comes in the form of organized religion, flies in the face of established science in a myriad of ways. Because if you hold to a particular religious tradition, that means you also hold to the mythology that religion is built upon. In your case, Mike, that is Catholicism and Christianity at large. So you don't just hold to some nebulous, unspecified belief in the supernatural. You believe in a God speaking the universe into existence from nothing. You believe in 6 days of creation. You believe in Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. You believe in a global flood that wiped out all living things besides Noah and his menagerie. You believe in God incarnating as Jesus and performing many miracles, including raising from the dead and ascending into heaven. And you believe in a host of other myths and legends about God intervening and displaying supernatural power time and time and time and time again in ways that stand in stark defiance of scientific reality. Science has revealed that the universe didn't form in 6 days with the Earth coming before the sun, or the sun and the moon being formed at the same time, or the moon being its own light source, all of which are laid out in the myth of Christianity. But instead that it formed over billions of years through naturally occurring processes like the Big Bang, and then more locally, star formation, accretion, and gravitational influence. Science has revealed that humans didn't come from a magic spell animating dirt into a human being and then taking a rib and growing that into another human being. But that we evolved from our evolutionary ancestors the same way all life on this planet did over millions of years. Science has revealed that there's never been a global flood, that in fact there wouldn't be enough water on the planet to cover all the land, and there exists historical records of entire civilizations that existed before, straight through and after when the Christian global flood supposedly would have happened. And they existed with no mention of such an event, and certainly not having been wiped out by it. And similar scientific roadblocks to the religious myths that make up the foundation of your faith abound all over the place. Now, in the wake of all this disagreement between faith and science, there's really only 3 possible ways to conclude that there actually is no conflict between them. 1. Insist that science is wrong. That's where you get people like young earth creationists, people who claim that evolution is all a hoax perpetrated by evolutionists and satanic cabals that are trying to win souls for Lucifer by turning people away from God. They'll say the Big Bang is nonsense cooked up by frauds. The global flood did happen, and every living thing that exists today is the result of rampant incestuous procreation. Oh, and also the Earth is flat, we never landed on the moon, and vaccines are the mark of the beast. That's one way. The second way is to ignore the parts of your religion that science has deemed false and just claim that they were myths and stories and just metaphors that weren't meant to be taken literally in the first place. Sure, there was no Adam and Eve, and sure, there was no global flood, and sure, there wasn't an actual burning bush, sure, the Red Sea didn't actually part, and sure, God didn't scramble the languages of the builders of the Tower of Babel because they built a tower, and sure, Lot's wife didn't turn to a pillar of salt because she looked over her shoulder, but then Jesus rising from the dead? Oh no, that totally happened, exactly as it was written. And every other part of the Bible that I want to interpret as fake, well, that was fake. And every part of the Bible that I want to interpret as true, well, that was true. So ignore the parts about not eating shellfish or not wearing mixed fabrics, because I don't want to follow those. But the part about being gay being an egregious sin, that is stone cold truth. So that's the second way. And then, of course, the third way is to just ignore all the science and faith contradictions and pretend they don't exist, and then refuse to even discuss the possibility of them being in disagreement at all. In a real, we don't talk about Bruno, no way of carrying on. So, pick your poison. Either be a science-illiterate, blithering idiot, a cafeteria Christian picking and choosing which parts of the religion you want to believe in and then ignore the rest, or an intellectually lazy self-deceiver turning a blind eye to hard questions about your faith because you don't like the roads of thought that they'll take you down. So better to not think about it at all, really. Frankly, all 3 of these options are pretty crap as far as I'm concerned. So you know what's a great alternative? Not believing any of that bullshit to begin with.
And I gotta tell you, it feels phenomenal.
So anyways, back to our story. And they were just saying like, but here we are, we're just specks, right? We're just specks in that are flying through space, and there are hundreds of billions upon hundreds of billions of stars and probably life other places in the universe. We're insignificant. Like nothing we do matters. All the squabbles we have these days and all the pressure people are under and to try to do this or avoid doing this other thing, he just came to this conclusion of just relax because it doesn't matter.
And this is the common conclusion that theists will reach when considering the idea that their God doesn't exist. The nihilistic notion that without God, nothing possibly matters. And even though I would have echoed that sentiment back when I was a believer, I only did so because it had been programmed into me by my religious indoctrination. Once I started really actually thinking about it, I've since had a real difficult time wrapping my head around this notion. Why would God not existing mean that nothing matters? Or better yet, why would God existing mean that because of his existence alone, things did matter? Let's say God does exist and has a plan, and everything that happens is in accordance with God's plan. Well, why should that mean anything matters? Sure, God's plan and things happening in accordance with God's plan would matter to God, but why should any of that matter to me? Why should I care about God's plan? And anyway, if God can do anything, couldn't he just rewrite the plan if someone chooses to do something that was outside of that plan? Couldn't God just do some editing to get things back on the track that he wants? And that would mean that anything you or I or anyone ever did or didn't do would ultimately be meaningless, because nothing could ever truly derail God's plan. The only claim of a God existing, imparting real meaning to life, is the notion that in a godless world, there is likely no afterlife, so when you die, you cease to exist. While in a world with a God, you go on to an afterlife, and everything you do in life has the meaning of moving you closer to heaven or closer to hell. And that only gives life the self-serving meaning of trying to get some cosmic reward for following draconian rules your whole life. It doesn't give any meaning to the rules themselves, which still seem to be arbitrarily set by a religious apparatus speaking in lieu of a silent God who won't tell you firsthand what the rules are. So you just have to pick a religious framework and follow their rules and hope that you have the right ones chosen. All so that you can get rewarded with an eternity of showering praise upon said deity forever and ever, never stopping, never ceasing, and somehow that not being an unimaginable torture. So in that framework, the only real reward is avoiding a proposed worse afterlife in the fires of hell. And all of that only turns life into a game of seeing who can amass the proper amount of cosmic brownie points to get a undesirable afterlife, but avoid an even more undesirable afterlife. And it further eliminates real meaning from anything you do in life. I mean, you don't help people because it's right and good to help people. Oh, that may be what religious people tell themselves, but under this notion of God giving meaning to everything, you're only really helping people to get those cosmic brownie points. Ultimately to help yourself, not because it's helping others. You're only avoiding harming people, not because you think it's wrong to harm people. Oh, that may be what religious people tell themselves, but under this notion of God giving meaning to everything, you're only avoiding harming people to avoid losing cosmic brownie points. And people can be easily swayed into thinking that they'll actually get more of those cosmic brownie points from harming people, like by burning witches at the stake or being inquisitive Spaniards.
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
It seems to me that believing meaning can only come from God destroys much deeper understandings of meaning and reduces everything down to what God wants. And what God wants is good because he's God. And God is important because he's God. And God is God because God is God. And I've never heard of circular reasoning or what a tautology is.
You're a speck of dust in the big scheme of things. And what even are human beings? We're nothing. Therefore, since there is no God, just do what you want because it doesn't matter. So relax and have fun.
This is the other thing theists often come to when considering the idea of no God existing. First, it leads to nihilism. Second, it leads to hedonism. And I think it belays a sinister little secret that a lot of believers are sitting on. Because apparently, a lot of believers are disgusting monsters deep down. Because when faced with the idea of no God existing, they almost immediately jump to, hey, that means that you can do whatever you want. Most especially all of those things that you only weren't doing before because your religion prohibited it. So, Mike, what stuff are you only not doing because your religion says not to do that you would be doing if you stop believing in God?
If there is no God, what stops you from raping and killing everyone you want to rape and kill? What stops you from doing that? And my answer is always, you're absolutely right. I have raped and killed every single person I want to rape and kill. And that number is 0, you evil mother!
I mean, forget that there are still laws that you're obliged to follow, lest you be criminally prosecuted and find yourself in jail, which I imagine would be an undesirable consequence that one would wish to avoid. Never mind that there's still the idea of a social contract and various pro-social behaviors that you need to continue if you want to continue to exist as part of a functioning community and society and enjoy the benefits therein. But just in general, I have a functioning sense of empathy. And so I don't want to engage in any behaviors that would cause harm or suffering to others. And when I think back to when I was a believer versus now, I can't think of anything that has really changed about my behavior. There's nothing I do now that I didn't engage in before. Other than that I sleep in on Sundays now, and I don't go around thinking that every Tom, Dick, and Harry who doesn't believe and worship exactly the way I do is destined for the fires of hell. But yeah, in general, as an atheist, I find everything to have much more meaning than I did when I believed in God. And I don't see any reason, nor any desire, to just go around engaging in what the religious would regard as sin with reckless abandon.
If there is no God, then do whatever you want. Like that, yes, please do whatever you want. Because if there's no God, there's no right or wrong. There's no such thing as right or wrong. Why? Because all there is what is. All there is either, when it comes to right or wrong, it's not right or wrong. It is either what you prefer or what works, right? It's either opinion or utility. That's all life is.
Ah, the morality conundrum. If there is no God, then there's no right or wrong, there's only opinion and preference. Well, no, Mike. Whether God exists or not, all morality is opinion and preference. It's just either God's opinion and preference or our own opinion and preference. Because even if God exists, all morality is still subjective. It's just subjective to God's opinion rather than our own. And why should I care what God thinks about right and wrong? If I disagree with God about morality, why should God's opinion supersede mine? Or yours? Or our collective human conception of right and wrong? Because, and I hate to break this little nugget to you, Mike, but it clearly does. God's morality does diverge significantly from our common human morality. If your God exists, he apparently is absolutely gaga for slavery. He legitimizes it in the Bible, gives rules for how to engage in it in the Old Testament, reinforces it in the New Testament, and never once anywhere forbids or even attempts to abolish it. Now, I think that any form of owning another person as property is morally abhorrent. Most of humanity would agree with me on that, and I would wager that you, Mike, are also opposed to slavery. Now, if we went by God's word and ostensibly God's will, we should still be engaging in slave-taking and trading. We should still be taking our slaves from the heathens around us. We should be able to own them as property, beat them within an inch of their life so long as they don't die within a day or two, and bequeath them to our sons and pass them down so that they'll be slaves for life. Now, Why should God's conception of that as a morally forthright thing to do take precedence over our collective human rejection of slavery as an immoral and inhumane practice? Oh, because it's what God wants. And what God wants is good because He's God. And God is important because He's God. And God is God because God is God. And I've never heard of circular reasoning or what a tautology is. Simple conclusion, Mike. All morality is subjective. Even if your God exists and has written incontrovertible moral law, that moral law is still subjective. Because it is a mind-dependent assessment of right and wrong, with God being the one making the assessment. As such, it is not objective. It is a value judgment that is being made by a thinking agent. And so, if the only morality that you are willing to accept would be objective, intrinsic morality that exists as a fundamental brute fact of existence, well, then it can't come from God. It would have to be apart from God, and even above God. God Himself would be unable to change it, and God wouldn't have created it to begin with. And if you want to believe in that kind of morality and that exists, go right ahead. But you don't need to appeal to a God existing for that kind of morality to be a thing. But if you're appealing to the idea of God-derived and God-set morality, then you're just leaning to a particular subjective, arbitrary moral framework that's based on the opinion and preference of God. No real different than what humans do in a godless universe, but saying that it actually matters just because it comes from God. And God is God, so what God says about morality matters. Which is an axiom that I cannot grant you. If your God exists and has made moral proclamations, and those moral proclamations are detailed accurately in your holy book, then your God's morality sucks. It's every bit as subjective as my own, and it seems to me that mine and our common human morality is significantly superior to that of your God. But since your God doesn't exist anyway, morality exists as it always has either way, subjectively.
If there's no God, then do whatever you want. Fun, relax, peace, just chill. On the other hand, if there is God, then I may not do whatever I want. Right? If there is a God who made this world on purpose and for a purpose, if there's a God who made you on purpose and for a purpose, then yeah, the bad news or the hard news is you may not do and I may not do whatever I want.
Why?
Once again, you're just giving this unexplained deference to the idea of God's design and God's purpose ought be followed, just because. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but according to your theology, didn't your God give us free will? Then how come I can't do what I want regardless of whether or not it's in accordance with His plan or will?
Why? Because you matter. Because your choices matter. Because everything you do doesn't just take on the weight of space dust flying through the galaxy, but everything you do takes on the weight of a being made in God's image and likeness that is destined to live forever.
And there it is. Because you're destined to live forever, and don't you want to get enough of those cosmic brownie points to get to heaven? This is the line of thinking that's been used by the powerful within the church, which has usually also been the powerful with their hands on the guiding wheel of society itself, to control the masses who submit to their authority and theology that they push. The promise of eternal reward in heaven and the threat of eternal punishment in hell, this can shift people's focus away from seeking justice or improving their material conditions in the present world. This can make people more meek and compliant by encouraging them to endure poverty, persecution, oppression, and hardship because it's a temporary test of faith that'll be rewarded in the next life. More of those cosmic brownie points. Oh, and you were created in God's image. But because of the fall of man, which somehow we are each and every one of us responsible for, that has caused us to have original sin. And then there's the demand for moral purity and the fear of divine retribution, and these can be powerful tools for social control. Religious authorities and texts prescribe behaviors like the Ten Commandments and the New Testament teachings and invoke guilt for nonconformity, which reinforces a strict moral code and limits individual freedom. And oh, how the church has engaged in social control. By emphasizing virtues like meekness, obedience, and hard work as divine mandates, the church helped mold the peasantry into a stable and desirable workforce for feudal lords in exchange for political support and protection. So, tithe till it hurts to the church. Pay deference to religious leaders, regardless of how many sex and CSA scandals they are embroiled in. Disown your gay child. Shun, ostracize, or generally view with suspicion your heathen, non-Christian neighbors. And vote away the rights of yourselves as well as everyone else who never agreed to live by your religious rules and prohibitions. And be resolute in doing all of this because you will collect so many heaven points in doing so. Because this is the stuff that really matters in life. Because God has decreed it as so. And of course, it's what God wants. And what God wants is good because He's God. And God is important because He's God. And God is God because God is God. And I've never heard of circular reasoning or what a tautology is.
Your religion is an abomination.
And so here's the question. The question is not just between, is there God, is there not a God? The question also is, do you matter? Do you not matter? The question is, do your choices have significance or are they completely insignificant?
I believe that I matter very greatly. And I believe that you matter very greatly as well as everyone else, that we all matter very deeply. And I believe that our choices that we make are also very, very significant. And that is part of, and one of the many reasons why I don't believe in a God. Because as I alluded to before, if God exists, then what we choose to do doesn't actually matter to any great degree beyond amassing those cosmic brownie points. See, Mike, I believe in the impact of our choices beyond just how they affect ourselves. I believe that if I choose to help someone carry their groceries inside, that I'm doing more than just scoring a couple of heaven points for myself. I believe that I'm positively impacting that person's life in however small of a way, and that it might result in them paying it forward and doing a similar kindness to someone else the next day. Or put them in a better mood, such that they pay a random compliment to their spouse, say, that they otherwise wouldn't have done. And that improves the mood and disposition of their spouse, who might then be a bit more upbeat when they go into work. And their happy mood might positively impact a coworker, who in turn will be more helpful to a customer or to another coworker. And in this way, small random acts of kindness can have massive, incalculably positive impacts on the whole of the world. And that this matters not because I will get a cosmic reward in the afterlife, but it matters because there is no divine plan orchestrated and maintained by an all-powerful, undeniable deity whose plan cannot be thwarted in the first place. There is only what we do and the actions and interactions that we have with each other to make life better or worse for those we share this planet and this life with. And since I care about other people, because I have that functioning sense of empathy I said earlier, my interest in this world extends beyond what my current heaven-high score is. If I believed in your God, Mike, I would think that nothing and no one mattered beyond being a means to an end for my getting to heaven. Which is to say that no one would actually matter at all, but only I would matter. And any perceived good I ever did would only be in ruthless, self-interested pursuit of my own well-being in a presumed afterlife. And if I believed in your God, Mike, I would think that no action ever really mattered or had intrinsic value. Because even if I did something that would result in harm to others, hey, it's all in God's hands anyway. I mean, God's got this. He'll clean up any real messes. The only degree to which anything I, you, or anyone else ever did actually mattering would be in how it would impact their get into heaven scorecards. But since I don't believe in your God, Mike, I believe that everyone really matters in and of themselves. That people have intrinsic value. Not because some supernatural being made them as a means to an end to fulfill a purpose that ultimately I couldn't give the faintest shit about, but because they are individual beings who have one life and one life only to live. They are my fellow inhabitants of this planet, and it is only through each other and by helping each other that we can ensure the best, most just, and most fulfilling lives possible. And it's because I don't believe in your God, Mike, that I believe that everything and every choice that we make has immense consequence, positive or negative, for the whole of society, and with ramifications that will reverberate throughout time for as long as life exists on this planet. The fact that I think life is important, and the fact that I think life does have so much meaning, is a direct byproduct of me not believing in your God.
Now, I'm not going to say choose one or the other because you like one or over the other. That's not it. The only reason we'd ever choose to believe in something is not because we like it, not because we prefer it, not because it works, but the only reason to believe anything is because it's true.
Oh, you don't want to go down that road.
Seriously, Mike? Everything up till now has been a rumination of feelings over facts. You want there to be meaning in life, and you don't feel like life can have meaning without a God behind it all. You want there to be objective morality, and you don't feel like morality can be objective without God. You want choices to matter, and you don't feel that choices do matter unless they're part of some God's divine plan. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm apart from this. I've been talking about feelings too. Because I do feel that life matters without God. More so even. I do feel that morality exists without God, subjective though it may be, and subjective though it would still be even if God did exist. And I do feel that choices that we make matter without God, more so even. But, as I mentioned, those are only part of the myriad of reasons that I don't believe in any God, particularly not the Christian one. But the primary reason that I have always expressed for why I don't believe in God is that there's no compelling reason to believe in God. So you really do not want to start going down the road of which position is actually true. Because once we start talking about how we ascertain truth beyond just feelings, and we start talking about things like evidence and empiricism and epistemology, well, let's just say that religion has never fared well in those arenas. And you wouldn't like where that exploration would take us.
So we have to ask the question. Let's ask the question of ourselves, of our own hearts, and ask the question, which one most accurately reflects our lived experience?
What? What the fuck?
You seriously just said, let's not just go by our feelings, but let's try to determine which is true. And then you decided that the way that we should do that is by asking our hearts? So you don't consider that just going by your feelings, Mike? You think your emotional response to life constitutes a valid and reliable path towards knowledge of truth? Well, I'm gonna have to call bullshit on that one, pal. One's heart, or more accurately described as one's feelings, are not a reliable path to truth. Because your feelings tell you that Jesus is the way and the truth and the life. And Muslims' feelings tell them that Allah is the one true God and Muhammad is his prophet. And Buddhist feelings tell them that spiritual enlightenment is the ultimate meaning and goal, and one does not need to appeal to any god in order to achieve it. And Scientologists' feelings tell them that we're all really alien ghosts attached to primitive apes by the galactic overlord Xenu, and we need to purge false religions from our minds in order to access our various superpowers. And Heaven's Gate's cultists' feelings told them that the alien spaceship was coming to take them to paradise and that they needed to consume poison at this specific time in order to get on the spaceship before losing the chance forever. There is no shortage of bullshit that one can be convinced that their feelings are telling them is true. Feelings are not a reliable path to truth. Which is why, even though my heart, my feelings tell me that there is no God of any kind, nor anything beyond the natural world, I still consider myself an agnostic atheist and a methodological naturalist rather than a philosophical naturalist. Because I recognize that my feelings are not a reliable pathway to what is actually true. So I don't believe in your or any other God, Mike, not because I insist that no such being could possibly exist, because I feel that to be true, but because I have never encountered any sufficient reason to think that any such being does exist.
And the one that I think the one that most accurately reflects our lived experience is we have a sense that even though we might not know the meaning of every single moment, we know that there's meaning in each moment, right? Like, this is true.
But see, Mike, that assessment only works if one pre-accepts your starting notion that meaning can only be derived from the existence of God, and that without God, nothing can have any meaning. See, that is the crux of your argument here, and throughout this entire video, you haven't even attempted to rationalize it. You haven't offered any argument for why life or morality or decisions are only meaningful with a God. And this is one of the major traps that most believers, and certainly most apologists, fall into. You simply cannot wrap your head around your axiomatic starting points not being accepted as true, and thus not being automatically accepted by your non-believing interlocutors. I do not accept that life is meaningless without God. I do not accept that God existing would automatically make life or choices or morality more meaningful somehow. I also do not accept that if God exists, his will and word and plan ought be followed, just because he's God. So I would agree with you when you say that our lived experience makes it clear to us that yes, our lives matter. That there is indeed meaning and importance in everything we do and choose and live and experience. I agree that we matter. But none of that leads me anywhere near the conclusion that, therefore, a God must exist. Because meaning exists independent of God. Meaning exists literally wherever you find it. Because at the end of the day, meaning is derived, not prescribed. We don't find meaning in things because we're commanded to do so and we're just following orders. No living thing does. The family dog finds meaning in belly rubs and couch cuddles, not because it believes in God and only through belief in God can any such action hold meaning, but because your dog loves you. It wants to cuddle with you. It wants your love and affection. And that's all the matter that it needs. Similarly, an atheist doctor finds meaning in repairing a patient's heart valve, not because they're responding to some religious notion of being like Jesus and healing the sick, but because doing so allows that patient to go back to their family and live their life as they see fit. And that's all the matter that atheist doctor needs. And if you tell me that, as a priest, you tend to the emotional and, even though I don't think it's a real thing, spiritual needs of your congregation only because you think it's your job assigned to you by God and it's how you're building up your cosmic brownie points, well, okay, if that's the only way you can find meaning to it, fine. I mean, I doubt that's all there is to it, but if you say so, I'll buy it. But still, the crucial part of that is that's how you find meaning. You find it. You derive it. Not because God has prescribed it as meaningful, but because you find it meaningful. So any way you slice it, whether God exists or not, meaning is only and ever personally derived, not deity prescribed. And so ultimately, your entire thesis falls apart, because it was all built on the foundation of meaning only coming from, only possibly originating in, the existence of God. But meaning most certainly exists independent of God, because it lies in us. It comes from us. And so if your lived experience tells you that what we experience has meaning, I would say that you are absolutely right. That is what we feel, and that is what our lived experience tells us. And that none of it needs to come from any God. But instead, God would only cheapen it. So if you really feel that life is truly meaningful, well then...
God doesn't exist.
So that was Father Mike and his exhortation on the implications of God not existing. Of course, it was a lot of old hat apologetic conclusions that are generally force-fed during childhood indoctrination. Oh, if God doesn't exist, then nothing has any meaning. Therefore, all non-believers are inherently nihilists who must not think anything in life matters at all. Therefore, all non-believers are just hedonists who'll just go around sinning with reckless abandon because they don't believe anything matters. And, of course, without God, there can't possibly be any real morality, because, of course, the only true morality that could possibly exist would be objective morality. Even though any God-derived morality would still be subjective, and moral relativism is the only possible morality, it's just a matter of who's making those moral judgments, humans on behalf of humans, or humans on behalf of God, as expressed in their holy text, which was also written by humans on the supposed behalf of God. But trust them, it's real. It's objective morality, for sure. And then concluding that the only way one could possibly find meaning in life, or choices, is if God is magically infusing all of that with magical, supernatural meaning. And since we feel things are meaningful, therefore that must be that magic, supernatural meaning that we're feeling. Because it couldn't possibly be that meaning is emotions felt by our brains as we attach importance to things, based on our own drives, desires, memories, attachments, nostalgia, affection, aversion, and value judgments. No, sir, couldn't be that. It must be magical God meaning. At the end of the day, this entire line of reasoning is just a barrel full of fallacies. There's appeal to emotion being a big one in there, but there's also argument from incredulity, because Mike just can't wrap his head around meaning coming from anything other than a deity. And there's also an appeal to consequence, as he ultimately just doesn't like how it would make him feel if God weren't real. And so to avoid that negative consequence and continue to feel like there is a supernatural guiding path and plan for him and everyone else, just continue to assert that God must be real, because he doesn't know how he would handle it if God weren't. But even without all of these fallacious reasonings, on its face, nothing Mike said here today is true. Atheism does not necessarily entail nihilism, hedonism, or immorality. Morality doesn't cease to be a thing without God. Meaning doesn't cease to be a thing without God. And feelings are not a good way to determine truth. The only thing he said that had any rhetorical merit was the one thing I agree with him on. That yes, we do feel meaning and importance in life. But there's absolutely no reason to appeal to a God in order to get there. And so that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Check me out on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Plinky merchandise, all that linked below in the description. Want to send a special thanks to Ray for their amazing Professor Plink artwork. I love it when the artistically gifted are inspired by Plinky, and I love seeing what people come up with. And this one brought in not only Plink, but the infamous Holy Book sign. So great going, Ray. Thanks for being a fan. Special shout out to my most recent super thankers here on YouTube, Pavel B., Asbestos Shawnee Bessel, Salvi Mike, Michael Martin, and extra special thanks to Autumnal Fling for their amazing generosity. And with that said, until next time, I'm Professor Plink reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.